Campaigning ahead of May's general election is formally underway after the Prime Minister informed the Queen that Parliament had been dissolved. David Cameron says voters now face a stark choice.
Ed Miliband pays lip service to working people while planning to hike taxes and increase debt. After 5 years of effort and sacrifice, Britain is on the right track. This election is about moving forward. And as Prime Minister, here at number 10 Downing Street, that is what I will deliver.
Nigel Farage says UKIP is the most diverse political party and is quite reflective of what modern Britain is. He's announced 5 pledges, including a promise to leave the EU. Nick Clegg has defended his party's record in coalition and says the Liberal Democrats are the only party anchored in the centre ground. A man who died after being hit by a tube train at the weekend had been trying to save his brother who'd fallen onto the tracks. British Transport Police have started an investigation into what happened at Old Street Station in the early hours of Sunday. Detectives who are asking any witnesses to come forward say it appears to be a tragic accident. A murder investigation is underway in Spain after a former British Olympic diver and his wife were found shot dead at their villa. Peter and Jean Tarsi, who are both 77 and originally from West London, were discovered in Alicante yesterday. Bill Bond, a journalist based in Spain, has been speaking to Ian.
It seems that the police have basically ruled out robbery. Nothing seems to have been taken or moved from the house.
A black cab driver from East London who sexually assaulted 2 young women who fell asleep in his taxi has been jailed for 10 years. 52-year-old David Perry of Gayton House in Bow carried out the first attack in January 2013. The second took place 16 months later, in May last year. Tracy Emin is warning there could be more riots if politicians don't fund the arts. The 51-year-old artist says art and creativity are the soul of the country. And the Duke of Cambridge has started work with the company behind the East Anglia Air Ambulance Service. Kensington Palace says that Prince William will start job-specific training before he starts flying missions during the summer. LBC weather. Heavy rain spreading eastwards this afternoon in London and the southeast, becoming breezy later, a high of 11 Celsius. Wintry showers for northern England and parts of Scotland, staying mostly fine across the rest of England and Wales. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Rupert Bhatia.
I'm Amy Solomon in the LBC Travel Centre. In North London's Bounds Green Road is still closed in both directions near the North Circular. It's because a water main's burst. I can still see lots of surface water on camera. Now that's causing delays on the approaches, including along the North Circular, eastbound from the Colney Hatch interchange and westbound from the Clockhouse interchange. The M25 has one of 4 lanes closed clockwise. That's between Potters Bar and Enfield, 24 to 25, as lorries broken down. So it's very heavy from junction 23 at the A1M. And on the South Circular, you're slow in Mortlake still, South London in both directions around Chalkers Corner. That's whilst works on the water main continue. Southbound on the M40 in Warwickshire, still down to 1 lane between 14 and 13. That's Leamington to Tatchbrook because of a diesel spillage. It's slow from 15 at Longbridge Island, and on the eastbound stretch of the M62 in West Yorkshire, down to 1 lane between 27 at Gildersham and 28 at Tingley because of an accident causing queues. Keeping you moving, your next travel update is in 15 minutes.
LBC Travel
with GoToMeeting. Fast, easy online meetings. Go online for a free 30-day trial.
The race is on. Follow the battle for number 10 live on LBC. The Vista of Venice, recognised throughout the world. But add in the sounds of the Grand Canal at first light, and it's unforgettable. It's these small finishing touches that make a huge difference. For the ultimate finishing touch for your home, use SureSet's permeable paving. Guaranteed for 15 years, it adds a classic touch to your home. Stunning, permeable paving from SureSet. To find out more, visit suresetfinish.com.
This is LBC, leading Britain's conversation. Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. LBC's Election Call.
Very good evening. It's Ian Dale at Drive here. It's day one of the general election campaign, and this is LBC's first of our daily election calls. Each day we'll have a leading politician on to take your calls, and we're starting off with Shadow Cabinet Minister and Labour MP Sadiq Khan. On May the 8th, he may have a tough choice to make: be a member of Ed Miliband's cabinet or run for Mayor of London. He's with us to take your calls for half an hour with your questions on 0345 6060 973. So if you want to know what Labour's policy is on any subject, it's your chance to quiz Sadiq Khan on LBC's election call right now. Well, we're also being streamed live on lbc.co.uk if you want to watch us as well. Thank goodness I wore a nice shirt today. Sadiq, thank you very much indeed for coming in to be our first victim, so to speak.
It's a pleasure to be in LBC being your first victim.
Well, let's get straight onto the calls. 0345 6060 973. Ben is in Harrow. Hello, Ben.
Hi there.
Hi, what would you like to ask?
Yeah, Mr. Khan, I'm a 20-year-old politics student. When Ed Miliband refused to convey what an appropriate figure on immigration is, and refuses me the right to a referendum on Europe, how can I have faith in this Labour leader that he has my future job interests at heart?
Well, thank you for your question, Ben. I was in Harrow on Saturday campaigning for a brilliant candidate, Uma Kamaran, to be the next MP for Harrow East. And what I'd say is this: look, immigration has brought huge benefits to not just our city but our country as well, economic, social and cultural benefits, not just over the last 10 years or 40 years or 100 years, but over the last 1,000 years. That's my starting point, not simply saying that as a son of immigrants, but as somebody who's seen the benefits it's brought to our city and to our country. One of the things we're trying to do is to be honest with the voters of this election. We'd rather under-promise and over-deliver. And you'll remember, I hope, that before the last general election, Mr Cameron said to the British public, look, I'm going to be straight with you. I will, by the end of the next Parliament, reduce immigration to this country from the hundreds of thousands to the tens of thousands. And if I don't, vote me out. And unfortunately, he broke that promise, and immigration to this country is still just below 300,000 people. And what he's not doing is inviting you to vote him out. He's hoping to stand there again, making another promise.
With that same pledge?
With the same pledge. And so what we're trying to do is to be honest with you and say, look, we're not going to give you a number about what should be the number of people coming into this country, because net migration, obviously, you've got to also factor in what emigration is, because people leave this country as well. But what we do say is this, though: it's really important that people who come here benefits our country's interests. Of course, there are some who are asylum seekers and refugees. We are a safe haven for those. But others who come here for work need to come here, and it should benefit us as a country. So, for example, if there are jobs available, we should give our people the skills they need to apply for the jobs and get the jobs. Employers should advertise in this country before they advertise overseas. But if an employer does decide to give a job to somebody else, we should require them to also give an apprenticeship to a local person as well. So we benefit from migration.
But can you not give, Ben, an indication of what you think roughly the right number should be? Not with any commitment as to sticking to that number, but what I think, Ben can speak for himself, but what I think you're saying, Ben, is look, if there are 250, 300,000 people coming in every year, over a 5-year Parliament, that's an extra 1.5 million people into the country. At some point, that's going to have to stop, isn't it?
Well, let me tell you the challenge with that question you've asked, which obviously is a good question, is because we don't know whether there'll be growth or whether employers will need more workers, more immigrants to do the work who are higher skilled, or whether there won't be. I mean, the basic rule is this: we want employers to try and look for the best people for the job, and that should be local people, because we want to skill them up to apply for the jobs. What we don't want is employers to exploit loopholes, to take on foreigners before they've even advertised locally. Some agency workers only advertise overseas in Polish, for example. We don't want to race for the bottom. Some employers, I'm afraid, they could get around the minimum wage rules by factoring in a commission.
Pledges is to control immigration. Sure. And so if you have that as an election pledge, surely you have to tell people that some rough number that you think is acceptable. Well, I mean, there were 250,000 people coming in your last year in power. Is that the kind of figure that you're looking at?
Well, what we want to do is to control immigration. Let me explain to you what we mean by controlling migration. Number one, let's try and count in and count out how many people are coming here, which means having border control at UKBA. Number two, when someone comes here, they shouldn't be able to claim benefits for at least 2 years. We have a social security that's reciprocal. You get out what you pay in. Thirdly, let's not allow employers to exploit legislation, which means that they can have a race to the bottom by exploiting overseas people by paying them less than they should be paid. Let's skill up our workforce to do so. As far as a figure is concerned, what I don't want to do is give a figure that we can't give a promise for. It's not a science. It depends on the employer's needs. It depends on whether we're in growth or whether we're in recession. We also have an issue about the EU. One of the excuses the government gives is 5 years ago they didn't realise that the EU was free movement of capitals, of good, services and people. They've suddenly discovered this 5 years later. So there are some things we can control outside the EU. Within the EU, we're going to negotiate to make sure people aren't coming here just for benefits.
Just before I'll let Ben come back in a second, but Labour have manufactured this mug, they've manufactured mugs for each of their 5 pledges. One of the mugs is a nice red mug which says "Control Immigration." Diane Abbott and Chuka Umunna have both said that they would never buy a mug like that. Diane Abbott was vitriolic about it. Would you?
No, let me explain why. What we can't do is use immigration as a proxy for issues that others have used in previous elections. And no, I'm not suggesting anybody was doing that. And we know from previous elections...
What were they doing then?
We know from previous elections that previous politicians from previous generations, and some from the current generation, have used dog whistle politics. We are not doing that. What the mug is trying to explain is we have a policy to control immigration by, as I said to you, have borders.
But you said you wouldn't buy the mug.
Well, because what happens is sometimes people misunderstand what the mug means. And, when you come from my background with the family that I come from...
But it doesn't take rocket science for people to sort of make interpretations. But, I mean, one of your pledges is to control immigration.
Absolutely right.
So why not be proud of it?
Absolutely
why not
right.
buy the mug?
Well, the question you asked me was, can the mug be misconstrued? And I think it can be misconstrued.
Well, I didn't actually ask that. I said, would you buy it?
Well, come on, you referred to Chuka and Diane. We both know why Chuka and Diane are concerned about the mug, as many people are.
Wouldn't. Well, let me just get this straight. Yes or no, would you buy this mug?
I personally wouldn't buy the mug.
Right.
I think it can be misconstrued, and what's important, we're quite clear what we mean by our
response
policies.
From you?
Yeah, sort of the mainstream rhetoric is there, but it's virtually like listening to David Cameron, honestly. The details aren't there. You talk about control in the same breath as immigration, but yet Ed Miliband refused to give a referendum on EU. And you can't talk about immigration without talking about our membership of
All right,
the
Ben,
EU.
we're going to leave that there, move on to another call. Susan is in Tolworth. Hello, Susan.
Hello, good afternoon to both of you. I'm very worried because you are a socialist government and France...
Not yet. They're not actually elected yet.
Well, if they are elected, people must realise I'm 60 now. Every time a socialist government has been in, the Conservatives have to bail us out. And the point is, they signed a treaty to let anybody in. You can't stop people coming into this country. That's why the Conservatives can't do anything. But the worst of it is, you're not being honest with people about all this.
So, Susan, what's your question?
My question is, you can't stop immigration, so don't lie. That's why David Cameron can't do it.
Well, in a way, Sadiq's already answered that in his last answer, because he said Cameron was wrong to make that promise, and that's why Labour won't give any figures this time. Sorry, I've answered your question for you, Sadiq.
But also, I mean, can I just say, where I passionately disagree with you is I'm not against immigration. Let me be quite clear. The idea that there are some politicians who are giving the impression they're against all immigration by talking in code. I'm not. I think immigration has brought huge benefits to this country. It still brings huge benefits to this country. What we need to do, though, is to control immigration, which is very, very important. And also, I'd remind you that when we lost the last general election, and we did lose, as far as the National Health, for example, was concerned, you talk about socialist governments, the NHS had the highest patient satisfaction rates ever and the lowest waiting lists ever. And now, 5 years on, the NHS has gone backwards, and it needs a Labour government to save and transform the National Health Service. And, recessions didn't just happen in the UK. You can't blame a socialist Labour government for the recessions in Japan, in the USA, in Germany, in France, in Greece. I mean, a Labour government, a socialist government in Whitehall didn't cause those recessions.
But it is true that Ed Miliband said he wanted, when President Hollande was first elected, he said he wanted to emulate President Hollande and he would be copying his economic policy. Well, he doesn't say that anymore,
I'm not sure if he said that. I mean,
words to that effect.
Well, he welcomed the election of President Hollande to France. Indeed, we welcome, the elections of all leaders around the world. We're a democratic socialist party.
Okay.
I'm not ashamed of being a democratic socialist.
Susan, quick response.
I'm not impressed. The Labour Party are the ones that brought the PPI in, and that's why our NHS is in a mess, because they went for the highest interest rate when interest rates were low.
Do you mean PFI?
Yes, they really messed up our health service. But I just feel they're going to go down the same road as France.
Susan, we may get a question on the health service. Thank you very much indeed for that. Jonathan is in Bedfordshire. What's your question, Jonathan?
Good afternoon, Ian.
Hi.
Good afternoon, Mr. Khan. It's Jonathan Robinson, the ex-prisoner.
Hey, how are you, Jonathan?
I'm very good.
For other listeners, can I just reassure you, I didn't meet Jonathan whilst I was serving time in Her Majesty's pleasure. But
we are reassured by that.
Jonathan is a prison reformer and has done
some
remarkable work on this.
What's your question, Jonathan?
Ian, hello. Basically, a statement and then an invitation.
Very quickly, if you could, because we've only got half an hour.
Of course, to discuss. Prison is the biggest missed opportunity of rehabilitating people whilst we've got them. Discuss.
Well, that's a short one.
Well, we currently have 86,000 people in our prisons, and the function of prisons should be both to punish but also to reform. Unfortunately, our prisons now are the most violent they've ever been. Prisoner on prisoner assaults and prisoner on staff assaults. Deaths in prisons are the highest they've ever been. The numbers of people who are in their cells and landings are the worst it's ever been, and we've got a crisis in our prisons. So what we need to do is to make sure we have prisons that transform people's lives at the same time as punishing them
are there too
by
many
depriving them of
prison?
liberty. A lot of the 86,000 people should be in prison because they are either persistent offenders or they may be violent. Some of them could well be rehabilitated as well as being punished outside of prison, especially those with mental health problems, those with drugs problems, those, many of whom can't read or write. Many of them, had we, thought about having decent facilities available in the community, alternatives that work, at the same time as punishing them.
Some people say, because part of rehabilitation, a small part maybe, would be giving prisoners the right to vote. What's your view on that?
Well, of all the things, and if I gave you 10 things that we should do to make prisons more effective, voting would be number 13. I mean, I just think, when you think of the issues that matter to prison, look, 70%...
Even though the HCR has ruled that we should do that.
70% have mental health problems in prison. 50% have the reading and writing age of an 11-year-old. Many have drugs problems. Many have alcohol problems. Many of them haven't got the skills to get a job. What we need to be doing, as well as punishing them, addressing their offending behaviour,
you can have all these problems and still be able to vote. In the last election, David Cameron said that prisoners would not get the right to vote as long as he was Prime Minister. Will you give that commitment at this election?
I've asked David Cameron, Nick Clegg, Chris Grayling, Ken Clarke to share with me your legal opinion as a result of the European Court judgment. Once I've seen that, I can form a view.
OK, let's... Jonathan, quickly.
At the coalface, most prisoners aren't bothered about the vote, quite honestly, and ironically, those that are would vote Tory. Most prisoners, and at least a good 10% of them, want to crack on and engage with the system. But as I'm on record with Mr. Grayling, saying to him, a playing up car will not fix itself if you lock it in a garage and ignore it. What I've been banging on about is, whilst we've got people in custody, we could do so much more with them. And that includes putting them to a lot of work, because so many of them want to work. As Mr. Khan says, we've got illiteracy problems, we've got drug problems, but doing nothing with them, ignoring them, whilst it's not up there on the election mandate compared with so many other things, reoffending is costing this country £13 billion a year. and HMP is bottom of the league on reoffending.
Jonathan, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, coming up later in the week on LBC's Election Call, we'll have UKIP's Patrick O'Flynn on with me tomorrow from 4. Grant Shapps will be joining Beverly Turner on Wednesday at 2:30, and Nick Clegg will be with Nick Ferrari on Thursday morning from 9. So that's all coming up on Election Call this week on LBC. Sadiq Khan is here taking your calls, 0345 6060 973. Daniel's in Barnet. Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Ian. Hi, Sadiq.
Hiya.
I wanted to ask if we're going to get some policy at some point, because it just seems to be emotive rhetoric from Ed, who we've mainly seen recently, shouting things like the bedroom tax at us, which is meaningless. And there's no policy behind it. So when is that going to come? Because there's not much time left, to be honest.
Well, 6 weeks.
Well, I mean, we've got plenty of policy. I can give you some now if you'd like me to. So on the NHS, we will have a time to care fund, which will mean that we will employ more doctors, nurses, care workers, £2.5 billion paid for by closing the loopholes on hedge funds, the tobacco companies paying more, and those whose property was worth more than £2 million paying a mansion tax. We've got a policy on the NHS, but also to integrate physical, mental and social policies, healthcare. We've also got policies to address inequality.
I mean,
we'll
without
massively
going
increase.
on a massive list here.
I know.
As soon as I say that,
you said we're policy.
I know, but I think the point Daniel is making that there, compared to previous elections, there doesn't seem to be a sort of massive divide in this election. There's no big issue. All of the announcements, sort of like saying taking winter fuel allowance off rich pensioners, I mean, it's going to sort of save £100 million. It's all sort of relatively small-scale stuff. I think people want to be inspired by a sort of big vision in this election, and they're not getting that at the moment from any party.
I mean, with the greatest respect, if you are on a 0 hours contract and you have a party who's going to form a government who's going to end the exploitation of those 0 hours contracts, 700,000 people on a 0 hours contract, that will change your life. If you're somebody who's on a minimum wage and you've been told that minimum wage will be massively increased, massive change to the quality of your life. If you're a young person who can't afford to rent a property, especially in London, let alone buy a property, and you're told a government will try and ensure there are 200,000 homes built a year, many of them in London, massive change to the quality of your life. If you're somebody who's been waiting a long period of time to be referred by GP to a specialist in hospital, and you're told the next government will reduce waiting times, massive change to your life. If you're somebody who needs to see your GP quicker than you currently are, a Labour government will change the quality of your life. There are many, many policies we have which address the concerns and issues
Daniel,
people have.
Give me something that you would like to see from our political leaders over the next 6 weeks.
Well, everything there was just an aspiration, and I can't vote on, how Ed Miliband feels he might like society to be at some point in the future. So it's things like housing. When they say bedroom tax, to me that's meaningless because it's all social housing. We've paid for that. So reducing the amount we then contribute on top is a good thing. So to reform that, we should say to the housing associations, you were given billions in grants. How about we see some return? Why is no one saying that kind of stuff where we look to get money back from the things we've already invested in?
OK, Daniel, let's move on to Jamie, who's in Cheshire. Hello, Jamie.
Good afternoon. Thanks for taking my call.
Hi.
Hi. It's a very simple question, really. Mr. Khan, I know that you've campaigned really prominently against the legal aid cuts that Mr. Grayling's brought in. I read recently that, whether or not it's true, you said that you wouldn't have the power to actually reverse them if you got into government. My question is simply whether you would reverse them or not.
This is a really important issue. It matters to me because not just my previous life as a legal aid lawyer, but because of the constituents I have and the people I speak to around the country. So what we're going to do is this. We're going to widen access to justice. We're going to, in particular, for example, criminal legal aid, we're going to cancel the government's two-tier contracts. What they basically wanted to do was to change the way criminal legal aid works. And the problem for that is many people who want due process, want to see justice being seen to be done, would be denied that, and miscarriages could occur. One of my biggest concerns is the victims of domestic violence. There are some victims of domestic violence who, as a consequence of the cuts to legal aid, aren't having access to justice. We're going to try and address that as a matter of priority. Another big issue of concern to me is what's called social welfare legal aid, the sort of stuff that you see in law centres and CABs. Nobody who works in a CAB or law centre is a fat cat ambulance chasing lawyer. We need to restore access to justice. I want to be will be one of my priorities.
So how much will all that cost? Because obviously, if you're going to reverse the legal aid costs, you're going to have to find some money to do that.
So what we're doing is working with those who work in the sector, the judges, the lawyers, those who use the courts, to try and find savings that we can make. And some savings have been offered by them, which the government didn't take. What I'm not going to do is salami slice the legal aid budget as the government has done.
But if you say you're going to reverse the cuts and do this, that, or the other, people are naturally going to ask, well, how's that going to be paid for? And if you just say, well, through efficiency savings, well, do we really not think that this government will have found those savings already?
Well, no, because they're incompetent and the Lord Chancellor is legally illiterate. So what we're going to do, for example, in relation to domestic violence, is there are savings that can be found in other areas, but actually we're going to spend a bit more for domestic violence legal aid, which we're willing to do. So we're waiting for the figures from the MOJ, but we think we can find that money. It's not a huge amount for domestic violence. To reverse judicial review, the figure's only £1 million, and we can pay for the reversing judicial review. The Low Commission has done a report in relation to social welfare legal aid. I find the recommendations very attractive. They're not very expensive, and we need to find savings there. So there are savings to be made, but more importantly, we can rejig the way the MOJ budget works to make sure access to justice is wide. And the other big thing, of course, is technology. IT has moved on so much that you can now divert people, like we did before with NHS Direct, to make sure they get proper legal advice.
Jamie, quick response from you.
Yeah, thanks. Actually, it's one of those situations where when you ask where the money's going to come from, the irony is that Chris Grayling didn't need to cut the legal aid budget like he did. The money was actually already on its way to being saved through some of the methods that Mr. Khan mentioned. The thing that concerns me about Mr. Khan's answer is that he hasn't actually just said yes or no. I agree the savings can be made elsewhere, but I was just looking for a yes or no answer in relation to it.
Can you give him a yes or no answer?
Well, we are going to widen access to justice. I'm not sure, how clear I can be.
Jamie, thank you. You're listening to LBC's Election Call with Sadiq Khan. You can watch us live at lbc.co.uk. I'm going to ask you a question now. It's May the 8th. Ed Miliband's won a majority. He calls you in and says, Sadiq, I'd like you to be Secretary of State for Justice. What's your answer?
I suspect my wife will answer the phone and say, Ed, Sadiq's sleeping because he's not slept for the last 3 weeks.
You're not going to get out of this one.
And let him sleep.
This is a question that is going to be put to you throughout this campaign, because we all know that you are thinking of running for Mayor of London. And on May the 8th, you may have to make that choice.
I've never hidden the fact that I get excited, I get goosebumps when people like you ask me a question about the most, for me as a Londoner, somebody who loves this city, to be asked if I could be the Mayor of London, it's exciting. I'm not going to pretend it's not. It's like asking an 11-year-old, do you want to play for England? Well, look, I'm not going to have a post-match celebration until we've won the election. The most important thing is between now and 10 p.m.
But you must have thought about what the answer would be. I mean, you can't sit here and tell me that it hasn't come through your mind. You must have thought about it.
I'm not going to count my chicks before they've hatched. What I'm going to do is work every second, every hour, every day between now and 10 p.m. on May the 7th to get a Labour government. Look, London is best served by a Labour government, and I need to do all that I can to get a Labour government. When Ed makes the phone call, as I hope he does, and when my wife answers it and wakes me up, I'll speak to Ed. But look, the reality is I want Ed in number 10, not because he's a good friend of mine, but because Labour, will serve the country better, and I think the country needs a Labour government.
You're listening to Election Call with Sadiq Khan. Let's talk to Haval, who's in Norbury. Hello, Haval.
Hello, good afternoon, gentlemen. Mr. Khan, my question is, we constantly hear Labour criticising the government or the Conservatives for all the austerity measures and the cutbacks. However, the other night when Ed Miliband was asked by the audience, where is he cutting and where he isn't cutting? And the only example he came up with was actually raising the income tax for the very rich from, 40-something% to 50%. Ring-fencing the NHS and education, that's fine, but he is not going to reverse any of the cuts that have introduced.
All right, let's go to Sadiq.
Well, let me explain to you how the Labour government would do this. Firstly, we would have to make savings, and we've been quite clear about the savings we've got to make. So, for example...
Have you? Because I'm not quite clear on where... I was watching Lucy Powell with Andrew Neil yesterday, and it was as clear as mud.
Sure. Well, let me explain to you then, hopefully I can. So, firstly, each one of us in the various government departments will be asked to do what's called a zero-based review. That means going through every single expenditure item to justify our budgets. And the zero-based review, some of the results have already been published in opposition, and so we've managed to save money in opposition, and we're going to save more money in government. Secondly, we'd have different priorities. So, for example, I'm afraid child benefit will only go up by 1% in the next couple of years. I'm afraid it's a difficult decision, but we've made the decision because we've got to make savings. Another example I'll give you is winter fuel allowance. At the moment, everyone receives winter fuel allowance.
£100 million a year that'll save. I mean, it's a trifling amount in the wider scheme of things, where you've got to find £90 billion.
Sure. I'm giving you examples of the sort of savings that we would make. The other area we'll try and make sure this works is by having fairer taxation. So I'm afraid we aren't going to say to those who are top rate tax earners that you only have to pay top rate, at a certain level. We're going to go back to the previous system of 50 pence to make sure we get more revenues in, and also those bankers who receive huge bonuses will have to pay taxes on them as well. But the third important part of this is making sure people, rather than those who are working receiving tax credits because they're getting paid low wages, but having high skilled jobs that people are paying more. One of the reasons why our budget doesn't balance is because the tax revenues have gone down.
Right, we're going to, believe it or not, we've nearly reached the end of our time. It goes quickly, doesn't it? Mark in Crawley has sent in an interesting text. Is Tony Blair a help or hindrance on the doorstep?
It depends which doorstep and depends which part of the country. I mean, listen, Tony Blair won 3 general elections for the parties, did great things for the country. Many people adore him. Some people, still haven't forgiven the Labour Party or Tony Blair for some of the things that we did in government. So some doors he's very popular, some doors less so.
If he rang you up and said, should we go campaigning together, Sadiq, would you want to walk down the streets with him?
I would say, Tony, there are some seats in London where you could be a huge source of benefit for us. So here's the list of where I'd like you to go, and let's
Middle England rather than maybe inner city London.
That's not fair. There are some parts of London as well where he's very popular. And you use your assets, you use your strengths where they are most beneficial to you. And so Tony Blair's of huge benefit in some parts of the country, but we want to win as many seats as we can. And let's be frank. Look.
So which bits is he not of benefit?
Look, someone like me who was against the war in Iraq, for example, someone like me who was critical of Tony Blair's foreign policy. But that being said, I've got to accept the fact and respect the fact there were lots of huge benefits that a Labour government brought between 1997 and 2010, and Tony Blair played a large part in those things happening.
Sadiq Khan, thank you very much indeed.
I've really enjoyed it.
Good. Well, I'm glad you have, because we got another 6 weeks of this to go. Now, coming up later in the week on LBC's Election Call, we'll have UKIP's Patrick O'Flynn with me tomorrow from 4. Grant Shapps, the Tory party chairman, will be joining Beverly Turner on Wednesday at 2:30, and Nick Clegg will be with Nick Ferrari on Thursday morning from 9. And don't forget, if you miss anything, you can get all of this and more from LBC's podcast service. You can get full details at lbc.co.uk. This is LBC. It's 5:31.
The race is on.
And this is the most unpredictable general election in a generation.